Okay. So welcome everybody to this webinar, Career Conversations Part 4. And those of you who've been with me all year will remember that back in April, I showed you the 4-part framework for mentoring conversations. Since then, webinars are focused on each of the, what I call the umbrella questions at the heart of the mentoring conversation. In part 1, we looked at the first question, which is, where are you now? Which is not the question that you ask your mentee, but it's a question you hold in your mind to frame that part of the conversation where you are exploring your mentee's thoughts and feelings. In part 2, then, we asked them, well, where do you want to be? We wanted to generate some options and possibilities, maybe expand their thinking a little bit there. And then in part 3, having made some informed decisions or set some goals, we assisted them to think about how they might get there with their goals and their action plans. Today, we're looking at, and I should just clarify in case people haven't been with me from the beginning, that although I show this model as a clockwise model, step by step, in real conversations, you go backwards and forwards and the conversation flows, and you use your skills and your intuition to lead this conversation. It's not one conversation, it's a conversation that takes place over a series of meetings or contacts with your mentee, especially when we're looking at career development, which is quite a broad subject. And there's lots of homework for your mentee to do to fuel these conversations. Today, we're assuming that you've worked through those first 3 steps. Where are you now? Where do you want to be? How might you get there? And the mentee's been able to implement some of their plans, working towards their goals. And they're now coming back for conversations with you about follow through and adjustment. Umbrella question, how are you doing now? How's it going now? Some variation, whatever fits comfortably with you. So, and you can, as I said before, you can view the recordings of those prior 3 webinars on the Mentoring Works YouTube channel. So I hope you'll do that. Now, this stage is quite crucial. It's likely career plans and goals are not achieved overnight, so it's going to occur over time. And it's a really important phase because it is your ongoing support. They're making big changes for themselves, and it mightn't always be easy. And it's your continued support and encouragement that's going to help them so much. You'll be someone they can rightfully share their successes with and also discuss their challenges along the way. That's why in this webinar, we're going to be looking at the techniques, if you like, the questions you can use, the way to lead that review process with them. We're also going to talk a bit about dealing with difficulties. It's not necessarily going to be a smooth road to where they want to go. So you want to have some tools in your toolbox for helping them to deal with the difficulties along the way. And we also want to have the ability to help them in this adjustment. This is change they're making, and change brings with it, you know, successes and sometimes failures. We have to recognize that. So really, we want to be able to be the mentor who helps them with that adjustment, deal with failure and also with success. So let's jump into that with the first topic now. So a longer term goal will need milestones. I'm sure you're all familiar with setting goals and milestones. It's become vogue in organisations over probably the last decade. So this is something you're probably familiar with, because they let people know how they are progressing. Sorry, my slide's getting ahead of me here. Now, I hope that you and your mentee actually set some milestones in your goal setting and planning phase. You actually thought about milestones. How will I know this is completed, step by step, these phases? And so you already have those kind of agreed, so that you've got a way for your mentee to know whether they're on track or off track, so they can make adjustments along the way. Now, if it's all going well, you're going to need to give them positive feedback. So that's a good reason to keep meeting. They can tell you what they've done, how it's going, and you reinforce their progress. You give them that positive feedback. But don't let them become complacent. You don't want them sitting around on their laurels. So you need to help them keep the eyes on the prize. And you want to maintain their momentum. So whilst you want them to take satisfaction in how far they've come, looking at what's still to be done is really necessary to maintain their motivation. So the key is look at how far they've come, recognize that, and also recognize, hey, there's still a way to go. And it's that balance that maintains the sort of edge and the motivation there. Now, that said, we need to be aware that we all have times of self-doubt, and that can rob a person of the grit to actually see their goals through. So take every opportunity to remind them of their strengths. In the earlier parts of the conversation, when they were reviewing and doing self-assessment, they've identified with you some of their strengths. So remind them of their strengths at every opportunity. This is a good antidote for self-doubt. Talk about the challenges that they've actually overcome. Point out to them, well, you faced this difficulty or that difficulty, and yeah, it was a setback, and you found a way over, through, or around that. Remind them. Remind them too that they can always increase their ability. We're all learning, we're all growing, we're all becoming stronger and better at what we do. We have that opportunity. So because you're at this level today doesn't mean you're always going to be at this level. As you gain more experience and more skills, you can move up a level in pretty much everything. And give them evidence. So point out from their background, perhaps from your own experience, if that's appropriate, even history and other people who have overcome self-doubt and increased their skills. One of the resources I came across when I was researching this book is the work of Stephen Guise, and you can find this on YouTube or just search online. And he wrote a book called Mini Habits, Smaller Habits, Bigger Results. And he recommends breaking down big goals into smaller goals. And he gives the example of doing push-ups. You might want to do 10 push-ups, you might want to do 100 push-ups, but start with 1. And once you can do 1, then you can do 2. And once you can do 2, you can do 3. So it's a matter of breaking those goals down into small steps. And that relates back to the milestones as well. You've broken that big goal down to the smaller steps that you can actually see the progress along the way. There is a temptation when things are going well. I've heard this so many times in mentoring programs. Oh, we don't really need to meet because there's no problems. I'm working towards my goals. Everything's fine. Don't let your mentee do this. Don't be tempted. You need to continue to meet regularly, even if they say they have no progress to report, because talking with you keeps their goals alive. And there are always experiences that they can learn from. And just because you're working on a particular goal doesn't mean that there isn't day-to-day development that's not worth talking about with a mentee, because your conversations help them gain insights from everyday life, from their working environment, what they're doing at work. And they can learn from those, and that will help them grow as a person, and it may help them as they move towards their goals as well. So continue that regular meeting. So if you started out meeting monthly or fortnightly, every 2 weeks or whatever it happens to be, keep up those regular scheduled meetings. Okay, so I've got some examples of questions that you might ask during this review meeting. I'd love it if you would type in your own examples as well, and share those with the group. I'll just give you a few of mine that are in the book, and you can share your own. And feel free to play with these, and it needs to be something you're comfortable saying and that's appropriate for your mentee. So what's been happening since we last met? And it's easy. After a little bit of small talk, you've settled down. Now it's time to get into the meat. Okay, and Ron is asking, is there a preferred frequency of meetings? That's something you need to negotiate at the beginning, and you can adjust that as you go along with your mentee. I always used to tell mentors and mentees, if you're not meeting once a month, you don't have a mentoring relationship. And this is a relationship, and you need to have a good relationship so that when they need you, there's enough rapport and trust. So nothing might be going wrong at the moment, or there might be not a lot to report at the moment. But when there is an issue, there needs to be that rapport and trust that you can, you're meeting, and you can just dive into that. Thanks for your question, Ron. Okay, another review question you might use. What's worked well for you? What didn't work out so well? So you want them to be reflecting on what's been happening since the last time you talked, and talk about what went well and what didn't go so well. And another suggestion, in hindsight, is there anything you could do differently? So you could use all those three questions in a conversation. You could use one of them. You could use a variation of them. I'm just looking, is there, okay, Ron, I'll come back to your question a little bit later on. I just want to keep moving, and for now, if anyone else has a question, feel free to type it in. I will come back to them in a little while. I'll just keep moving through our content for now. So we're going to start to look at dealing with difficulties. I've got a little difficulty here. I've got a curious cat who's trying to walk across my keyboard right here. So please forgive that. Okay, so dealing with difficulties. So if your mentee encounters difficulties, you need to adopt this collaborative problem-solving approach. You've heard me say many times before, it's not your job to solve their problems. It's not your job to tell them what to do. In fact, our webinar next month is be slow to give advice. I don't say never give advice. In many cases, they want your input and your advice. I just say be slow. And one of your strategies is to develop this idea of collaborative problem solving. And, often just talking through an issue with your mentee and being a sounding board to them. This used to be one of the most common descriptions from mentees. They'd say, my mentor was a sounding board. I could bounce my ideas off them. I could, just talk out loud. And what happens very often when you have the chance just to talk out loud to someone who's a good listener, who doesn't jump in too quickly with advice, who restrains themselves from telling you what to do, often you have that aha moment. You get that insight. You know what it is you need to do. So your task is not to solve the problem, not to jump in quickly with advice, but rather to listen and ask questions. Ask those questions that make them think. You're on their side. You're working with them. It's a collaboration, a partnership, if you like. So don't offer solutions too quickly. That's a last resort. Now, if you followed through on the previous webinars, in our planning, we actually looked ahead and we said, well, let's be realistic. What are some of the things that could go wrong? And maybe put in place some contingency plans or some strategies to deal with those if they do come up. So if you went through that process and this is a foreseen issue, then you've already done your homework and you've got some ideas already on the table for how to deal with this. So look back at those actions that they planned and help them to enact those. Now, I want to remind you once again of this term, the presenting problem. This is a term from counselling and therapy. I'm not suggesting we're therapists here. We're just borrowing some of the techniques. And I want you to keep this term in mind. And what it is, and medical doctors as well as counsellors and so forth regard this. The person comes in and they have a presenting problem. This is the thing that they can articulate. This is something they can explain to you as the problem they think that they are dealing with. But if you don't jump in too quickly, don't start prescribing answers, you get them to talk, you listen, you ask those questions, and you're looking for the underlying cause of that problem or that issue. If I go to my doctor and I say I've got a headache, okay, my doctor's not going to just prescribe headache tablets. My doctor's going to take my blood pressure and ask me a whole lot of questions about other things and what's going on in my life to see if there's some reason for that issue. And you need to be the same. And we've talked about the questions and the techniques to help with that. Now, the other thing you want to do is start to look at, you're trying to find out why. Why is this an issue? What's really going on? But there's a problem with asking why. And what can happen when you say, well, why? We're trying to get to the cause and the effect, and it might take several iterations to get there. But the problem really is when you ask someone why, well, why did you do that? Why did that happen? Why do you think that? Why do you feel that way? It automatically raises their defensiveness. And I chose this little picture because the turtle or the tortoise, you know, is renowned. When the tortoise feels in danger, what does it do? It pulls its head and its limbs inside its protected body, and people metaphorically do the same thing too. When we feel defensive, well, it's one of the things we do. We retreat inside our shell, or we come out fighting. We've got a bit more defensiveness than a turtle. So fight, flight, freeze. I've spoken about this before, but whichever response we come up with to defensiveness, it's really going to restrict our communication. What some people do is start to justify why they feel that way, why they did that, and so on and so forth. And the problem with that is it causes them to focus on their fears, or focus on their shortcomings or their insecurities. And it can actually entrench that mindset. Now, what we're trying to do is expand the mindset, open the mentee to possibilities and opportunities, not close it down. So we need to be really careful about asking that question why, and about creating defensiveness, because it keeps them stuck where they are. So here are some things you can do to reduce defensiveness. So first of all, be aware of your non-verbal communication. I mean, a lot of us are still doing Zoom meetings, and if we can see each other, there's still a lot of body language that can be read, especially your facial expression. But the other thing that we can build in and be aware of is our tone of voice. Now, I call this respectful curiosity, and you can convey that in your tone of voice. your facial expression. So I was on a Zoom call the other day, and I just had someone's image on the screen of the Zoom. You know how you get the active speaker. So someone had spoken, and I was really lucky because it's his image that stayed on screen for what was quite a demanding Zoom presentation. And he was the best non-verbal feedback I could get. It was like I was talking to him. He was nodding, he was smiling, he was jotting things down, and it was such positive feedback to me to boost my confidence and allowed me to do what I thought was quite a good presentation. So giving that feedback, even your posture, if you've got a nice, relaxed, maybe a little bit leaning forward, you need to be comfortable with this. This is not something you fake, but just try to be aware of what your non-verbal, and non-verbal is your tone of voice as well as your body language. I've talked before in previous webinars about cushions that soften confronting questions. So it's a cushion is just a little phrase that you put in front of what's probably going to be a deep question that allows you to do that non-verbal thing, to show that respectful curiosity. And it can be something like, and you'll have your own repertoire of these, type some in if you've got some examples, something like, I'm curious, and then you ask your question. I'm wondering, or would you like to tell me? Can you tell me a bit more about that? Or do you mind if I ask? Those sorts of short phrases that, again, convey that respectful curiosity. And then that is, I was just talking about the why and how defensive that can make people. And it's not that hard to rephrase. Try and get into the habit of this. This will serve you well in general conversations with your family, with your friends, with your co-workers. Anytime you can avoid using why will serve to increase your communication and rapport. So one example is, well, what do you think might be a reason for that? And again, it's a bit of a cushion. It's a bit of a non-verbal communication. What do you think might be a reason for that? And it's respectful curiosity. What got in the way? So instead of why did that happen? Well, what got in the way? And that acknowledges that it's not just as simple as, action and results. Sometimes there are barriers to things. What happened to cause that? Okay, it gets away from all the blame, all the shame. It acknowledges that there are circumstances and other events, and it opens up rather than shuts down the conversation. It reduces defensiveness. Okay, just letting more people in here. Okay, so do be aware and alert to clues that it's not so much external obstacles that are holding them back, but maybe some conflict within themselves. Because if you set big goals in particular, it is going to require continuous effort and commitment over the long term to achieve those goals. So you want to check, are they still committed to the goal? Now, typically, if there are difficulties, if there are problems that are more within than outside of them, they boil down to competing priorities that sap time and energy. And I'll talk about each one of these in more detail in just a moment. I was just glancing at questions that are coming in. I'll pause in a moment to respond to questions. So competing priorities, we all have these. They can sap your time and energy. Waning motivation, the research suggests that we are most committed to our goal just after we've set it and just before we have to do the hard yards to actually work towards it. So waning motivation, lowered self-confidence. If something's gone wrong, it can tend to lower our self-confidence. The need for additional knowledge, skills, or techniques, or maybe we're talking careers here. So maybe their first choice career move isn't actually panning out. There's no guarantees in this. Sometimes you can work towards something, and for whatever reason, it's not working out. So let's look at these. Okay, the first one was competing priorities, these might require a discussion about time management, setting priorities, managing time, because there's a lot of skills involved in this whole area. So it might not necessarily be something you can mentor or coach them in. It might be something that maybe they go away, maybe there's some books that you can recommend, and maybe there's some other people or maybe some other resources within your organization. If this is the issue, perhaps it's a time management question. But if it is confidence that is the issue, sometimes the conflicting or competing priorities is a reflection or a sign that they may be lacking in confidence. If it's waning motivation, then we need to return to our conversations about their values and why they chose this particular direction. What was their motivation? What was their values that this direction was going to help them with? Or is there some fresh problem that's come up? So we need to kind of backtrack and have a look at that. Okay, so if it's a lack of confidence that we're looking at, again, review their strengths. You've had these conversations earlier in the mentoring relationship. Go back to those. Look at their confidence in the terms of strengths. Look at their past achievements. What have they done? Reassure them that with experience comes confidence. Maybe they've started a new job and everything's new to them and they've had to hit the ground running, and it's a bit of a very natural worry about their job. So reassure them, everyone finds it difficult at first. Are there specific issues that are challenging them? Perhaps if there are, perhaps those are topics for conversation that you can assist them with or point them in the direction of resources. And finally, as I said, I don't say never give advice, just be slow to give advice. But it may be you can offer some opinions and some suggestions at this stage. And maybe they need to develop some additional skills, point them in the direction of getting those. What we need to do is, if they're not making headway on the goal that involves say changing jobs, you need to establish where the problem is. So I'm using the example of they want to change jobs as an example, but this could apply to other situations as well. So where exactly is the problem? We want to narrow that down. And is it, for example, that they're not finding jobs that they can actually apply for? Or is it they're applying, but they're not getting interviews? Or is it, they're finding the jobs to apply for, they're applying, they're getting interviews, but they're not winning the job? Now, all of these are separate issues and they have a distinct problem, but each one can be fixed. So this example, can you see how these problems are different? So we can't go in with a blanket solution to this. We've got to work out where the problem is in the chain of events. Okay. So that example demonstrates a need for classic problem solving. I'm sure you've seen models like this before. For example, if they're not finding jobs that they can apply for, why is that the case? Is it because they're not looking in the right places? Where are they looking? Are they looking at jobs and perhaps they think they're not qualified to apply for those job. So you want to explore that a lot more, and then you can help them work out an answer, or perhaps you can offer some opinions and some advice. The thing to remember as we look at difficulties that people experience, this is a journey, career development, career planning, achieving career goals. And we want to help them understand that setbacks are temporary, and careers are a long-term project. A focus not just on what's gone wrong, but what's gone well helps to foster productive conversations about what they can do differently to overcome their conversations. So always I come back to that two-part question: what worked well, what didn't work so well. And I like to end on a positive, so I'd probably rephrase that. Okay, we've looked at what's not going so well. Let's just look back at what did go well and help them find out, well, how could you apply that in this situation? That thing that you did well, that approach you took, how would that work in this current situation? Okay, I'm looking at questions now. We are running very close to time. Okay, so Ron had an earlier question. How challenging is it for the mentor or mentee to be in different cities or countries? I think now, Ron, that we have all got used to Zoom meetings, and most of us have the technology. I mean, the fact that you're here today suggests you have the technology to support that. It reduces that difficulty. The biggest difficulty I think you have in different cities or countries is a time difference. I know my friends in the Philippines here today, Australia is 2 hours ahead. I know some of you in the States, it's probably Thursday evening or nighttime. You can tell me what time zone you're in, or tell me what time it is where you are. I know there are different times. So to me, the time zone difference, okay, yeah. So Australia is 14 hours ahead of US, which makes it sort of morning here and nighttime in the States. And that's just, the UK, things like that. We don't get many UK people on this webinar because the time zone difference is too great. And many of us have this issue too, working in organisations these days that have dispersed teams in many different countries. So there are ways around it, not always easy, but they can certainly be overcome. Okay, just letting some more people in. Okay. And Ron also asks, rephrasing the why. Can the mentor suggest a why, or is that not a good idea? I'm not. There's a couple of interpretations of your question here. I would always err on the side of being slow to jump in with opinions or advice. If you have developed a really good rapport with your mentee, if the relationship doesn't have too big a status difference, you could certainly suggest why, but it wouldn't be your first action. It would be down the track a little bit into your conversation, and you would introduce it as a possibility. Some of the phrasing I tend to use is, in my experience, when X happens, Y tends to follow, and after that comes Z. So you're making an observation, you're suggesting a possibility, you're engaging in a two-way conversation, a dialogue. And you might rephrase it more simply than that. And you could just say, sometimes when that happens, I found that it's because of blah, blah, blah. Have you thought about that? Could that be the case in your situation? So we've got to be careful about assumptions and so forth. And I hope you'll come along next month to the Be Slow to Give Advice webinar. Okay, so we're moving along now. We are looking into the third segment of this webinar, where we're going to be talking about adjusting, making adjustments and dealing with failure and success. And I want to start out by sharing with you a true story about an older gentleman that I know. And he was a successful businessman, small businessman, and he'd run a number of businesses before his last one sent him broke. And he and his wife had really put their hearts and souls into this business, and invested heavily financially in it as well, looked after their staff ahead of themselves. And yet they lost almost everything when the bank liquidated their assets. However, just a few years later, he tells me it's the best thing that ever happened to him. They had a very tough first year after losing the business, but they took what they had, they used their skills and their experience, and they built a new and better life for themselves. And often failure that leads to a different sort of success is not an uncommon experience. I mean, if I could see you, I'd say hands up who's had something that was quite devastating at the time, but you would now say, that's the best thing that ever happened to me. You can pop your hand up if you want to do that, or share in the chat. But yeah, I know from my own life, there are lots of things that seem utterly devastating at the time, but turn out okay in the end. However, I don't want to, we mustn't fall into the trap of trivializing what people are going through, or not recognizing when they're down in the pit. They need our empathy and our listening and our support. They don't need too many, kind of get over it and get on with it type lectures. But there are many people who are successful in arts, sport, business, or science that will tell you there is no success without failure. There's an abundance of example. If you look up, say, Michael Jordan's missed shot, the basketballer, how many times did he get it in and how many times did he miss? Steve Jobs was sacked from his own company, Apple. Think about the Wright brothers. They crashed so many planes before they got one that stayed in the air for 10 seconds. 60 odd years later, a tiny piece of the first aeroplane the Wright brothers got to fly, a couple of tiny pieces were taken to the moon just 66 years later. So gosh, that's amazing. But there are plenty of people who will tell you there's no success without failure. But the key is to understand that failure is disappointing and it's painful, but there's not a human on the planet who has not failed. We all do. Often, sometimes we don't notice. Sometimes we shrug our shoulders and just get on with it. Sometimes we give ourselves a really hard time. Sometimes we ruminate, blaming, locking ourselves in misery. Hopefully, we learn to pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, and move on. And we develop resilience when we use failure for learning. And, I chose this picture. Someone's obviously looking at an experiment there, and the failures tell you as much as the successes quite often. The key is really mindset, and you will help your mentee most if you foster these sorts of beliefs. And I'm going to go through each one of these and some of the ways you can help foster them. So the mindset you want, the beliefs you want to encourage in your mentee. You have failed. You are not a failure. Setbacks are temporary. Failure is feedback. Blame is disempowering. Failure is an opportunity to reset. And okay, so let's go through each of these and how you can foster them. So you have failed. You are not a failure. And it's like our society is obsessed with success. and we're not really taught how to cope with failure. And let alone welcome it as an opportunity. An emotional response to failure is natural, and emotional pain can actually hurt as much as physical pain. So you need to show your mentee empathy. So listen to them and show them empathy. Listen as they express their feelings and give them enough time for this, but there's a caveat. Don't allow your mentee to label themselves. A lot of people carry labels throughout their lives, and the negative ones can be really quite harmful. So instead, you want to start to shift their attention. When you've listened to them well, when you've shown them that empathy, when you feel that they have kind of got it off their chest, they've had time to ventilate, now you shift their attention from the past or even the present to the future. So you want to encourage them to see that failure is an event. It's something that happens. It's not a life sentence. So it's what they didn't work, but it doesn't categorize who they are. So the next point was setbacks are temporary. So the pain of failure sometimes can kind of overwhelm us, but it will pass. So listen to them. Are they painting the event as catastrophic? Do they think this one failure will ruin their life or destroy their future forever? So help them put failure into perspective, seeing it in the context of the greater scheme of things. How much impact will it actually have on them? I mean, there'll probably be some parts of their lives that it will have no impact whatsoever. So it's impacting on one particular area. Excuse me. Sometimes, I hate the platitude, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, but actually, sometimes that is true. So change, difficulties can lead to growth. So let's look at this next idea. Failure is feedback. Failure means something was wrong. It's a chance to figure out what went wrong, so you can rectify it. You can bet that the Wright brothers and all the other inventors who were trying to design aircraft at that time looked at each one of their crashed planes carefully to figure out what went wrong and literally went back to the drawing board. So failure is feedback. And then it enables to, when you can pinpoint what went wrong, you can try again, or you can assess whether it's worthwhile trying again, or is this in fact something that's not going to work. The Dalai Lama said, when you lose, don't lose the lesson, meaning we can learn. So help your mentee figure out, get them to reflect and get insight from the failure. There's usually more than one reason for something to go wrong. The next point is blame is disempowering, both blaming others or circumstances and blaming oneself are counterproductive. Blame makes you a victim, makes you helpless and powerless. One of my favorite, concepts is a classic one from Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I do recommend, if you don't have this book, it should be on your bookshop. It is a bookshelf. It's an old book. It's a classic and it's so worthwhile. This concept alone is worth the price of admission. So Stephen Covey said, represent these 2 circles. There's this large circle that represents all the things that are concerning you, worrying you. You think about, the state of the world, climate change, the economy, the war in Ukraine, all these things. might concern you. But if you put your energy and attention only on all those things, you will quickly be overcome. You will quickly be overwhelmed, and it's not good for your health and your well-being. So instead, Stephen Covey recommends look at your circle of influence. It is smaller, but it is where you can make a difference. It is, some people call it the circle of control. It represents the things over which you have most control. For example, what you say, what you do, what you think, what you say to yourself, as well as what you say out loud, and what you think, where you put your energy and your attention, what you consume. And that is where you have the most control and the most influence. And the interesting thing about that is if you put your energy and attention where you can make a difference, your circle of influence, it grows bigger. And this big circle of concern, okay, it doesn't go away, but you're putting your energy and attention where it can make most difference. So do teach your mentees about the circle of concern and a circle of influence, and adopt it for yourself. So help your mentee recognize the factors over which they do have some control and the factors over which they do not have control. And this is very, very empowering. We're talking about blame as disempowering. It makes you a victim and powerless, and we want the opposite of that. So you can help them recognize missteps. Maybe some things they didn't work out or were the wrong things to do. Help them recognize that without heaping on this blame or self-blame. Don't let them beat themselves up. If they can recognize that that was a misstep, hey, that's the first step in learning from it. They can then make better choices. They can have conversations with you about what they might do differently. Okay, the final step here in dealing with these difficulties is regarding it as an opportunity to reset. And it might be, we all need time for rest and recovery. You know, you talk to sports people, and after the big match, they put all this training and effort in up to the match, and you know, the pinnacle is the match. After that, they need rest and recovery. And muscles, you do a big workout, you need rest and recovery. Mentally, when you tackle big problems, you need rest and recovery. We can't work 24/7. We need those periods of rest. We need recreation and relaxation. Look at the word recreation. What does it conjure up for you? And it'll be different for everyone. But look at that word, recreation. We are recreating ourselves and our ability to go out in the world. We need to play more. We need to relax more. We need to do things that are not work but are enjoyable. And an opportunity to reset in the sense, again, that we can use the lessons learned. We can do something differently. Okay. I hope that this process has equipped your mentees, and you've got some tools now to set new goals with realistic expectations with the benefit of hindsight. I want to move on now to and end on a positive, as I said, by talking about how to handle success. So hopefully you've got some realistic, practical and positive approaches to failure. And we acknowledge that I like that phrase, there is no success without failure along the way. It's unrealistic. So I feel like we encourage people to be humble about succeeding, but it is important to celebrate and take pride in the hard work of achievements. You know, I hope, like me, you've got a few trusted friends with whom I share significant results, with whom I have permission to brag when something good happens. I'm going out to lunch today with my fellow author friend, and I've got a big brag to share with her, and she will give me that positive reinforcement, and we will celebrate together. Now, you are the trusted person, and I know in some cultures this is a bit harder, and for some individuals it's a bit harder because we're being taught to be humble, but you can be the trusted person, the safe place where you can allow them to have their brag. You can be the one who acknowledges their achievements. You can be the one who encourages them to celebrate in some way that's appropriate, celebrate their success. You share their challenges, so why not share their triumphs? Now, the interesting thing is there is as much, if not more, to learn from success as well as failure, and the process is pretty similar. What worked well? If they can reflect and figure out what went well, and also without shame or blame, look at what didn't work so well and have a conversation about what you might do differently. These are life lessons. We don't just set one goal and achieve it through life. We set many goals. Career is a lifelong project. They'll go through this process again. So reflecting on the lessons learned is really important. And you know, one of the things that I think is most wonderful about mentoring is accepting the gratitude of the mentee. And I hope you allow yourself to experience this with grace and, okay, a little bit of humbleness. Obviously, you're going to definitely point out to them that they did the work, that they were the ones that did the hard work, but hopefully it's been a pleasurable, rewarding and developmental process for you too. So you can share that with some grace and with some pride as well. The other beautiful thing about mentoring is most people who have been mentored tend to mentor others. The skills that they will pick up for you, the conversational skills, the way you lead these conversations, the way you are able to hold back from jumping in with too much advice too quickly, the way you listen and respond, your empathy, your respectful curiosity. These are things that people can absorb and consciously or subconsciously be using in their own relationships, and probably go on to mentor other people. I can't tell you, and you probably know yourself, you remember the people that mentored you, and sometimes you've picked up these techniques from them. So take joy from your contribution, and like the little drops in the pond, they ripple out, and you may never know how far that influence of yours will extend. So we've come to the end of our content, just within our time frame too. I'm going to stick around for your questions. We talked about some of the techniques you can use for reviewing progress, and I know a lot of people dropped in late. Don't worry, I've recorded this and I'll get it up onto YouTube as soon as I can, so you can catch the beginning along with the previous webinars as well. We've talked about some ways you can deal with difficulties that the mentee may be experiencing, and adjusting both to failure and to success. So thanks for being with me. Stick around if you've got questions. I'd love also to hear back from you. What are the key points you've taken out of this presentation, and or what will you do with that? What are your actions? A reminder, we've got one more webinar scheduled for this year, the end of October there. You'll be receiving information, an invitation to that, and by all means share that invitation if there are others who are interested as well. All of the content so far in this year's webinar has come from my book, The Mentor's Toolkit for Career Conversations. And it's more than a book. It has reproducible activities, checklists, templates, examples of questions and thought starters and discussion topics. And it has access to a little course that I wrote, Tools for Mentoring. It's an online video self-paced career planning course that your mentee, the password and the link is in the book. It's available pretty much everywhere in the world, mainly through Amazon or your favorite platform. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording now, but I will stick around for your questions and comments, and you can share your observation. Yes, Calais, the ebook is available. You can get that on Amazon, I think on Apple Books, Kobo, those sorts of platforms. So I'm going to stop the recording now. Stick around if you're on the live broadcast. And if you want to join us on future live broadcasts, do subscribe to my mailing list. Look for my website, mentoring-works.com, and join us there for invitations. Thank you very much.